Judges chapter 15. Victory with a jawbone. But after a while, during the time of wheat harvest, Samson visited his wife with a young goat. "I am going to my wife in her room," he said, but her father would not let him enter. "I thought for sure you had utterly hated her," her father said, "so I gave her to your best man, her younger sister. Isn't she better than her? Please, let her be yours instead." Then Samson said to them, "This time I am blameless from the Philistines when I do harm them." So Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and took torches, turned over the foxes tail to tail, and put one torch between every two tails. Then he set fire to the torches and released them into the standing grain of the Philistines. Thus he burned up both the stacks and the standing grain, along with the vineyards and olive trees. Then the Philistines asked, "Who did this?" They were told, "Samson, son-in-law of the Timnite, because he took his wife and gave her to his best man." So the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. Then Samson said to them, "Since you have acted like this, surely I will take revenge on you. After that, I will quit." So he struck them leg upon thigh with great slaughter. Then he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Then the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and spread out in Lehi. The men of Judah asked, "Why have you marched against us?" They replied, "We have come to arrest Samson, to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are ruling over us? So what is this that you have done to us?" He said to them, "As they did to me, so I have done to them." "We have come down to bind you," they said to him, "so that we may hand you over to the Philistines." So Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you yourselves won't kill me." "No, we won't kill you," they said to him, "but we will bind you fast and hand you over to them." So they bound him up with 2-necked ropes and brought him from the rock. When he arrived at Lehi, the Philistines shouted upon meeting him, but the Ruach Adonai came mightily upon him, so that the ropes that were on his arms became like flax burned with fire, and his bonds melted off his wrists. Then he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out and took it, and killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said, what did he say? "With the jawbone of a donkey, a heap, 2 heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I struck down 1,000 men." As soon as he finished speaking, he threw the jawbone from his hand. Then he named that place Ramat Lehi. Then he became very thirsty, so he called to Adonai and said, "You have granted this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, so now will I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised?" But God split the hollow place that is Lehi, and water came out of it. When he drank, he regained his strength and revived. Therefore he called it En Hachor, which is in Lehi to this day. Then he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. Judges chapter 16. Delilah betrays Samson. Once Samson went to Gaza and eyed a prostitute there, so he went to her. The Gazites were told, "Samson has come here," so they surrounded him, lay in ambush for him all night at the gate of the city, and kept quiet all night long. "When morning light comes, then we kill him." But Samson lay in bed till midnight, got up at midnight, grabbed the doors of the city gate along with the 2 gateposts, and pulled them up, bar and all. Then he put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of the mountain that is near Hebron. It came about afterward that he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. So the Philistine lords came to her and said to her, "Coax him, see what his great strength comes from, and by what we may overpower him, so we may bind him to subdue him. Then will each of us give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me, please, where does this great strength come from? How could you be bound to subdue you?" Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh cords that have never been dried, then I would be weak and be like any other man." So the Philistine lords brought up to her 7 fresh cords that had never been dried, and she bound him with them, while an ambush was waiting in an inner room. "The Philistines are upon you, Samson," she said to him. But he broke the cords just as a strand of straw snaps when it touches fire, so his strength remained unknown. Delilah said to Samson, "Oh, you deceived me, you lied to me. Now tell me, please, how can you be bound?" He told her, "If they only bind me with new ropes never used for work, then I will be weak and like any other man." So Delilah took new ropes, tied him up with them, and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." Yet while the ambush was waiting in the inner room, he snapped them from his arms like a thread. So Delilah said to Samson, "Up to now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you can be bound." He told her, "If you were to weave the 7 locks of my head with the web of a loom." So she pinned it with a pin and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin of the loom and the web. "How can you say, 'I love you,'" she said to him, "when your heart is not with me?" This is 3 times you've deceived me, and not told me where your great strength comes from. Now it came about when she nagged him daily with her speeches and kept bothering him, his soul was annoyed to death, so he divulged to her all his heart, and said to her, No razor has ever been upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will go from me, and I will be weak and be like any other man. Now when Delilah realized that he had confided to her all his heart, she sent up and called for the Philistine lord, saying, Come up this time, for he has told me all his heart. So the Philistine lords came up to her, and brought the silver in their hand. Then she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and had the 7 locks of his head shaved off. She even began to humiliate him, while his strength departed from him. And then she said, The Philistines are upon you, Samson. When he awoke from his sleep, he thought, I'll go out as other times, shake myself off. He did not comprehend that Adonai had departed from him. When the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes, they brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze chains, and he became a grinder in the prison. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it was shaved off. Samson avenged. Now the Philistine lords gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate. And they said, Our God has given our enemy Samson into our hand. When the people saw him, they praised their God. As they said, Our God has given into our hand our enemy and the destroyer of our country, who has slain many of us. Now it came about when their hearts were merry that they said, Call for Samson, that he may amuse us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he did not make them laugh, when they made him stand between the pillars. Then Samson said to the lad that held him by the hand, Let me feel the pillars in which the temple rests, so I may lean on them. Now the temple was full of men and women. All the Philistine lords were there, and about 3,000 men and women on the roof looking on while Samson was amusing them. Then Samson called out to Adonai and said, My lord Adonai, please remember me, and please strengthen me only this once, O God, so that I may take revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson grasped with the 2 middle pillars which the temple rested, and leaned on them, one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. He bent with all his might, so that the temple fell on the lords and the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed during his life. Then the kinsman and all his father's household came down, lifted him, brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb where his father Manoah, for he had judged Israel for 20 years. Judges 17, Micah's idols. Now there was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah, and he said to his mother, Take 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, which you also repeated in my ears. Behold, the silver is with me. I took it. And his mother said, Blessed be my son of Adonai. And he returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, I wholly dedicate the silver from my hand to Adonai for my son, to make a graven image and a molten image. Now therefore I will return it to you. So when he returned the silver to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave them to the silversmith, who made it into a graven image and a molten image. And they were kept in the house of Micah. Now the man Micah had a shrine of gods, and he made an ephod and household idols, and consecrated one of his sons to become his priest. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Now there was a young man from Bethlehem of Judah, of the clan of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. Then the man departed from the town from Bethlehem of Judah, so to sojourn whither he could find a place, and he journeyed, and he arrived in the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. And Micah said to him, Where do you come from? And he replied to him, I am a Levite from Bethlehem of Judah, and I am traveling to stay wherever I may find a place. So Micah said to him, Stay with me, and be a father and a priest to me, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year, and a suit of apparel and your provision. So the Levite went in, and the Levite was content to stay with the man, and the young man became to him one of his sons. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, Now I know that Adonai will do me good, seeing as I have a Levite as my priest.